Welcome to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska, broadcasting from Melbourne, Australia. Today we're going to start a series which we are going to dedicate to Dimitris Lithou, who is the author of the book titled The Greek Anti-Macedonian Struggle, Part 1, From St. Ilya's Day to Zagorishani, 1903 to 1905. It's a publication which was published in a few years ago, in fact, 2012, by Salient Publishing. And the author, once again, is Dimitris Lithou, translated and edited by Dr. Chris Popov, David Vitkov, and George Vlahov. I'm not sure how many of these episodes we're going to have, so we are just going to start today and we'll see how we go. It may take a few episodes. So it's a series dedicated to Dimitris Lithou, and the title, The Greek Anti-Macedonian Struggle, Part 1, From St. Ilya's Day to Zagorishani, 1903-1905. The book itself has got quite a few pages. In fact, 149 in total, followed by an extensive bibliography at the back of the book. So, without further ado, once again, you're listening to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska, and that's me, an independent journalist here in Melbourne, Australia. In the preface section of this publication, I will show you the publication. Let me show you the publication. Here it is. Yeah. In the preface, it says the Greek anti-Macedonian struggle in review, a journey from myth towards history. The Greek anti-Macedonian struggle is a book, among other things, about Greek nationalism and the effect it has had on Macedonia, its inhabitants, and on modern Greek historiography. Nationalism is a word that is difficult to define succinctly. There are many facets to this form of social solidarity, which is an integral aspect of the modern world, though there is not space here to make an attempt to discuss this in detail. I will limit myself to suggesting that one sensible way to treat nationalism is to accept that there are numerous varieties of it. There are, for example, tolerant versions that accept and even make exertions to maintain ethnocultural plurality, in fact. In direct opposition are those streams of nationalism with an inability to cope with difference and which tend towards attempts to exterminate it. Of course, all nationalist movements can possess substreams that defy the dominant tendency within their group. Social life is complex, and often the neat categories devised by historians, journalists, and others fall far too short of presenting these discrepant intricacies. On the other hand, it is not possible to record history precisely, as if one could take a photograph of it and thereby illuminate every little detail. Actually, all good photographers realize that any type of lighting will always veil some aspects and are also acutely aware of how readily framing can serve to deceive. Historians need to begin from such premises and then proceed with a desire to capture, as honestly as possible, all the contradictions that muddle up their prejudices and assumptions. For historians inhabiting a social milieu predominantly possessed of the more intolerant versions of nationalism, this can be a very difficult task to perform. In fact, it is not unusual for such historians to be little more than hubristic, self-serving myth makers. In their chronicles, to quote Orwell, material facts are suppressed, dates altered, quotations removed from their context and doctored so as to change their meaning. Events which, it is felt, ought not to have happened are left unmentioned and ultimately denied. Orwell, 1984, 314. Historians emerging from a context obsessed with uniformity will need to exhibit and consistently maintain a very high level of moral courage if they earnestly desire to be loyal to the spirit of their vocation. For it is in the nature of their social realm to publish the authors of prose who deviate from its essential canonical foundation yarns, which in actuality, among other things, are often spun to conceal the existence and persecution of very real human beings. The punishments naturally vary depending upon circumstances, from ostracism to exile, incarceration, or even death. Most of us, even though we may reside within the boundaries of a more flexible culture, will have at one time or another experienced at least a transient moment of painful alienation inflicted by peers for the transgression of some minor norms. The scars of even such short-lived episodes can nevertheless remain with some people for very substantial periods. It is difficult then for those of us inhabiting relatively tolerant societies to imagine what it is like for individuals that are required by their vocation to place themselves in a situation where they become almost constantly ostracized by all of the surrounding social structures, from the family to the state. These are forms that we strangers, observing the xenophobia from a safe distance, mostly take for granted. If these traditional social configurations were to suddenly become unaccommodating, the shock, regardless of the idiosyncrasies characterizing our individual natures, would be significant, as these structures provide for our freedom and security, for our existence as we know it. Greece and ethnic minorities. Greece is a country that has welded national citizenship to Greek ethnicity. Thus, not only are ethnic minority groups routinely denied various citizenship rights, the Greek nation-state even refuses to recognize their existence within its borders. This is especially so in regard to the Macedonian minority inhabiting Greece. The Greek authorities frequently propagate a vehement denial, United Nations 2009, Decision 13, about the existence of a Macedonian ethnic group and language anywhere in the world, let alone Greece. In conjunction with this, Greek historians habitually write accounts of modern Macedonian history that implicitly support this rather cruel form of ethnic intolerance or bigotry. In this context, it is ironic to observe that Greek governments often complain about the treatment of ethnic Greek minorities within other countries. This sort of double standard should not come as a surprise to those familiar with the nature of Greek nationalism. As the anthropologist Loring Danworth has explained, there is a, quote, fundamental incompatibility of the Greek nationalist conception of the ethnos as an integrated entity embodied in the state, and a philosophy of inalienable human rights. Danforth wrote this in 1995, semicolon 130. This fundamental incompatibility obviously places Greece out of step with current human rights standards and laws. For more on this, see the United Nations report on Greece 2009, column 22 to 23, and Human Rights Watch 1994. Dimitris Lissou. Dimitris Lissou is a Greek author of historical prose who resides in Corinth. Over 2 decades ago, he decided that he would take historical discourse seriously and accept the moral challenge demanded by the field through which he has chosen to express himself. By all accounts, this has resulted in serious personal difficulties, for it has made him a victim of the social ostracism briefly discussed before. His courage needs to be acknowledged and commended. Without individuals like Litsou, who can serve as models for others, Greek ethno-nationalistic hubris is not likely to be undermined. In 1998, a book Litsou has written in Greek and entitled The Greek Anti-Macedonian Struggle 1903 to 1905 was published in Greece. I had heard many good things about its content, though not being literate in Greek, I was unable to see for myself until a Macedonian translation of the Greek original by Vasco Karaja was published in 2004. From the introduction of the book, Litsou makes it clear that it is his intention to deconstruct the unquestioned tales that Greek historiography has been propagating about the Macedonian struggle for decades. Quotation. I'm characterizing as the Greek anti-Macedonian struggle that which in Greek national history is recognized as the Macedonian struggle, a major chapter in recent Balkan history, which Greek historiography has presented in such a way that it makes historical truth unrecognizable. It has created a completely mythological story structured upon various lies and the wiping out of historical occurrences. Lissou, 2004, column 7. The referencing of Litsou's book in this preface applies to the Macedonian version of his book. Greek historians and politicians alike, as Litsou demonstrates with numerous quotations, have attempted to present the Macedonian struggle as, quotation, as a heroic struggle by the Greeks from Macedonia in the period 1904 to 1908 for the preservation of their national identity and for their independence. That is a battle which, from a national aspect, should be judged as the second fundamental point after the uprising of 1821. By researching not only the published and unpublished memoirs of the participants in this struggle, but also the Greek state archives in Athens, Litsou made discoveries that lead in the direction of a very different version of events. Quotation, that heroic struggle exists only in the books of Greek historians. That which actually occurred could only engulf the majority of Neo-Greek citizens with feelings of shame and regret. End of quote. A major problem for Litsou and others like him is that the elites maintaining the dominant ideology for utterly selfish reasons employ their power towards drowning out peripheral voices of reason, like Oskirimli and Sophos, Nevertheless, we must admit the possibility of challenging and eventually altering hegemonic forms, for they are man-made and therefore can be subjected to meaningful change. From this perspective, Lizzo's efforts need to be reviewed as need to be viewed rather as very significant. Just to remind you all that you are listening to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska, broadcasting from Melbourne, and we are sharing with you Dimitris Litso's publication titled The Greek Anti-Macedonian Struggle, Part 1, from St. Ilija's Day to Zagorishani 1903 to 1905, a publication published in 2012 by Salient Publishing here in Melbourne, Australia. The findings emerging from Lisso's excavations required him to characterize the Greek Macedonian struggle as, in fact, anti-Macedonian, as a, quotation, systemic effort implemented by the Greek state at the beginning of the 20th century to inflict a blow upon the national democratic autonomist movement of the Macedonians. In that struggle, the Greek state and the nationalistic para-state became allies of the Ottoman establishment at the time. They had at their disposal a high amount of finance and firearms for the formation and sending forth a guerrilla bands to Macedonian territories where Greeks did not reside in order to terrorize the inhabitants and to stop the process of Macedonian national revival. The Greek mercenary bands, under the leadership of Greek officers, occupied themselves with violence, plunder, and slaughter. They sowed horror and death throughout Macedonian villages, and they unsuccessfully attempted to block the development of a Macedonian national ideology and the democratic autonomist struggle of the Macedonians. As already, end of quote, as already indicated, Lithos methodically utilizes primary Greek sources to corroborate his assertions, which he describes as a journey from myth towards history. The Macedonian Ilinden uprising against Ottoman rule. In 1903, Macedonians launched an uprising against Ottoman rule that became known as the Ilinden Uprising because it began on August the 2nd, St. Ilija's Day. Lithos explains that the uprising was, quote, systematically prepared by the Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, IMRO, the participation of the village Christian peasantry. Macedonia was, at this time, a mostly peasant farmers' land, was general in the regions where the uprising broke out, especially in Western Macedonia. Ilinden was hostilely met by the Greek state, whose consular organs cooperated with the Ottomans for its suppression. The eruption of a revolutionary movement fighting for the creation of an independent Macedonian state similarly frightened both the Turks and the Greeks. The former would lose the European part of their empire, while the latter would lose the inheritance of the big sick brother. The Ilinden uprising was bloodily suppressed. The Patriarch, Greek-speaking Orthodox Church, and the spies of the Greek government placed themselves at the service of the Ottoman army and Bashibuzuks, the Muslim paramilitaries. The burning down of villages, the killing of innocent women and children, and the plunder of everything was the response of the Ottoman state. The whole of Europe would come down on the side of the Macedonian rebels, except Greece, which would condemn them and slander them. End of quote. Moreover, as Lizzo underlines, Greek historians have consistently portrayed Ilinden as an insignificant event not widely supported by the local population and as something which was exported to Macedonia by the Bulgarian state for the purpose of trying to strengthen Bulgarian claims upon Macedonia. It is Lizzo's contention that in order to present the public realm with such formulations on Ilinden, Greek historians have permitted prejudices emanating from their cultural baggage to determine the nature of their literary output. Indeed, Lizzo demonstrates that these Greek historians have regularly ignored and excluded mention of important evidence from primary Greek sources. In connection with the Ilinden uprising, the most striking example of ignoring evidence that Lizzo uncovered are reports written in 1904 by a Greek official named G. Zorbadzoglu. He was sent to Macedonia by the Greek Foreign Ministry, and his task was to systematically analyze the social conditions in Macedonia, and in particular to find out more about the IMRO. He was, in other words, charged with writing a series of ethnographic reports. Until Lizzo, the findings of these reports were simply excluded from the accounts given by Greek historians. Why? Asks the author. The reports, as Lizzo demonstrates, with extensive quotations, seriously put into question the official Greek, in quotes, historical stance on both the Ilinden uprising and the IMRO. For example, after a series of broad tours of Macedonia in general and Central Macedonia in particular, Zorbadzoglu concluded that the, quotation, revolution in Macedonia is not Bulgarian, and that the IMRO has been very successful in garnering support from the masses. And end of quote, on account of one single reason, that they have no aim other than to liberate Macedonians as Macedonians. In the aftermath of Ilinden, the Greek state decided to begin exporting Greek guerrilla bands to Macedonia for systematic proselytizing among the Macedonian peasantry via the use of terror. What does Lizzo tell us about one of the leaders of these exported Greek guerrilla bands? A figure widely celebrated in Greek national mythology, Pavlos Melas. Melas was a Greek military officer who led a group of Greek state-funded mercenaries throughout the country of Kostur, today located in Greece and called Kastoria in Greek, in Macedonia for a short period after the Ilinden uprising. And Lizzo unveils enough to destroy numerous Greek myths. For example, during his tours, Melas wrote to his wife, complaining that in village after village, the women cannot speak even one word of Greek. Which language did they speak? Melas' correspondence explains that in one Macedonian village, in order to lift the spirits of the Greek military officers, the local school teacher asked his students to sing a song. However, Melas wrote that he isn't sure about which language they sang in, Macedonian or Greek. In an attempt to some extent overcome the communication problem and gain at least a little trust from the Macedonian villagers, Melas informed his wife that, quote, I have learned some Macedonian words, which I use among the women and especially the mothers. End of quote. Apart from the language barrier, Melas wrote to his wife about his fear of the locally born Macedonian revolutionary leader Yankov. Melas complained that Yankov had poisoned the consciousness of Macedonians with the idea that they constitute a nation, quote, independent from all other nations. These expressions of Macedonianism during the early 1900s. For wider discussions on this topic, see Friedman, 1975, and 2000, and Rossos 2008, and the general inability of Meles to find speakers of the Greek language would come as a surprise, to say the least, to those who only possess access to texts loyal to the traditions of modern Greek historiography. It would probably be even more disconcerting for such readers to discover the murderous brutality employed against the indigenous Macedonian population by Meles, his cohorts, and others who followed them. After such knowledge, what forgiveness? Think now, history has many cunning passages, contrived corridors and issues, deceives with whispering ambitions, guides us by vanities. From T.S. Eliot's Gerontion. The Greek anti-Macedonian struggle is an eye-opening account which succeeds in exposing many of the vanities of Greek historiography. I certainly found it worth the effort to accompany Dimitris Lissou on a journey from myth towards history. This was written by George Vlachov of the Australian Macedonian Human Rights Committee, AMHRC. That was the preface. We will now continue for a few more moments and share with you the author's introduction. As the Greek anti-Macedonian struggle, I characterized that period in Greek national history known as the Macedonian struggle. It is about a significant chapter from the modern history of the Balkans, which Greek historiography has presented in such a way that makes historical truth unknown, creating a completely mythical story based on various lies and an erasure of historical events. In looking through the national Greek bibliography, we find a characteristic populist definition of the so-called Macedonian struggle in a book by Pavlos Samis. Quote, "The Macedonian struggle is a bright page from the history of the nation, still unfamiliar to the wider public, although it explores one of the most glorious and inspiring accomplishments of the Greek people. This struggle can be considered a second significant point in the life of the nation after 1821. It looks like a fire which burns and illuminates the whole of Macedonia and proved capable of keeping it Greek. The Macedonian struggle gives rise to fantastic self-sacrifices and incomparable heroisms and marks a period of upsurge of the nation." That was Pavlos Samis' commentary from 1975, or is contained in his book, as a matter of fact. An extract from another national historian, Apostolos Vakalopoulos, is also in the same vein. The place of the Macedonian Macs, Greek guerrilla fighters, generally sent by the Greek state to Macedonia, that is a translator's note, who with their blood enchanted the land of Alexander the Great, is equivalent to the fighters from 1821. If the latter resurrected the Greek state, the former renewed their heroisms, yes, and supplemented their deeds. Truly, the historian who studies the events of the century 1821 to 1921 records three stages, major stages. The 1821 revolution, the struggle for Macedonia at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century, and the offensive from 1912-1913. The second stage reaches its highest point during the years 1904 to 1908, because at that time, the Macedonian struggle was systematized and reached its zenith. It was continuous and strong, rich with heroic sacrifices, but also with successes. That was Apostolos Vakopoulos. For such a historical period, which is considered to be so important, the opinion of an eminent leader of the Greek political system, Konstantinos Karamanlis, is of particular significance. In a similar vein, he also considers the struggle for Macedonia as one of the brightest pages in the history of the nation. the bloody and all-encompassing struggle of Macedonian Hellenism in securing its national identity and gaining its independence. If we try to bring together the above-mentioned views, says the author, then it can be said that the Macedonian struggle in Greek national history is considered to be a heroic struggle by the Greeks from Macedonia in the period 1904 to 1908 for the preservation of their national identity and their independence. It is a struggle which, from a national perspective, should be considered a second significant phase after the uprising of 1821. However, that heroic struggle exists only in the books of Greek historians. That which actually occurred could only engulf the majority of neo-Greek citizens with feelings of shame and regret. The Greek anti-Macedonian struggle was a systematic effort undertaken by the Greek state at the beginning of the 20th century in order to deliver a blow to the national democratic autonomist movement of the Macedonians. In that struggle, the Greek state and the nationalistic parastate became allies of the Ottoman establishment. They had a lot of money and weapons at their disposal for the formation and dispatching of armed bands to Macedonian territories where Greeks did not live in order to terrorize the population and stop the process of Macedonian national rebirth. The Greek mercenary bands, under the leadership of Greek officers, committed massacres, other acts of violence and plunder. They sowed horror and death among the Macedonian villages and unsuccessfully tried to prevent the development of a Macedonian national ideology and the democratic autonomist struggle of the Macedonians. In the pages that follow, for the first time, the anti-Macedonian nature of this struggle is presented via the published memoirs and diaries of Greek Macedonomacs and a large number of unpublished Greek historical documents. In essence, this is a reverse journey from myth towards history, writes Dimitris Lissou in his publication, The Greek Anti-Macedonian Struggle, Part 1, from St. Ilya's Day to Zagorishani, 1903 to 1905. Originally published in Greek, then translated into Macedonian, and in 2012, it was translated in English. And hence the reason why we are able to share this with you in the English language. I think perhaps we should end it here for now. And next time when I see you, we will continue with chapter 1, titled The St. Ilya Day Uprising, where we'll learn a lot about what happened during those periods that the author is writing, that is 1903 to 1905. Quite a revealing publication, written by a person of Greek background, a historian, a prominent historian. So I thank you for your attention. And I'm looking forward to seeing you very soon. Bye for now. You've been listening to In Focus with Silvana Pavlovska.